All right. So, Matt, yes, thanks again for coming on today, for sharing your time and sharing your wisdom as well. This is our first time speaking, but I already feel like you've been coaching me through reading your book, 80/20 Triathlon, and
Right now.
uh, currently just diving into one of your training plans through Training Peaks and listening to you on podcasts and stuff. So it's cool
Cool.
to actually meet you now.
Good to meet you.
Yeah. So I was wondering, maybe just to start off and share some context, if you could maybe share a little bit of sort of your story with running and endurance sports. Sounds like you had an experience watching your father run a marathon at an early age and have
Yep.
pretty much been running ever since.
Yeah, it was. I grew up in New Hampshire, and my dad ran the Boston Marathon three times actually, but the first time was in 1983, and our whole family. I have two brothers, and so the whole family trooped down to Boston to watch him, and then my two brothers and I actually ran the last mile with him and crossed the finish line with him, which you couldn't do today, I don't think.
Yeah.
But that was an amazing experience, and yeah, it just sort of normalized long distance running for me at an early age. I was a soccer player back then, so initially I just ran. I started running right after that regularly, both just for the connection with my dad, but also I found that it helped me as a soccer player too.
Mhm.
And here I am still running. Was it close to 40 years later?
Yeah. That's cool. So did you get into like running track or cross country, things like that in high school?
Yeah, I ran a couple of track races. It's funny. I was just going down memory lane here. I joined my middle school track team at the end of the eighth grade. Ran the mile a couple times, and then I actually blew out my knee playing soccer right around then. So didn't get to run the district championship. It was like, this is the dark ages for ACL rehabilitation. So it took me forever to fully recover from that. And by then it was winter track for my indoor track for my freshman year of high school. And my surgeon said, you really shouldn't play soccer or ski or basketball or pretty much anything involving lateral motion. So that was just as well. Soccer, I mean, running was the only sport I was any good at. So yeah, I was all in for running at that point.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I tore my ACL playing soccer, and that's what kind of got me into running in my mid
Uh-huh.
20s. Because rehabbing from that, just being able to run in straight lines, like you're saying, it's a lot
Right.
kind of safer. And then I did my other ACL playing basketball just a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years
Oh,
ago,
wow.
and and so it's kind of started. It's kind of reset everything now, getting back into running, but it's been a much longer recovery process to work through the
Uh-huh.
pain and all that stuff. So yeah, it's the ACL can be quite an interesting instigator for all sorts of running endeavors. It feels like.
Yeah, it's a pretty devastating injury. I mean, even today,
Hmm.
yeah, it can change things forever.
Yeah. Did you have to get surgery as a young athlete at that point?
Yeah. Yeah, mine was, I remember, this is so long ago, but I remember it clearly. The orthopedic surgeon said, first they just knew something was bad.
Yeah.
So, they did an arthroscopic surgery just to see what it was. And he told me after I woke up that my case was extremely unique in that I had completely severed the tendon, just ripped it right off the bone, but that none of the surrounding structures were damaged. He said, usually if the ACL tear is that severe, you mess up a lot of other stuff too. And that wasn't the case
Mm.
for me. So good news, bad news.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. So, as you kind of got into adulthood, it seems like you're pursuing writing and sort of that academic pursuit as your sort of career path. But I imagine the, pursuit of running and endurance and then triathlon just continued to build. Was it pretty parallel alongside that?
I stopped running for a while because I burned out at the end of high school. I had intended to run in college, and that's part of the reason I chose the college I went to, Haverford, in Eastern Pennsylvania. It was Division III, but they had a really great program. It was perfect for runners like me, sort of like B-level talents in high school, and the coach just turned them into, it was like a factory for churning out All-Americans. And it's actually a huge regret now, because when I quit at the end of high school, I thought I was done for good. But then I only got back into it. I mean, this is, call it fate, if you will. But a couple of years after graduating from Haverford, I moved to San Francisco, and I wanted to be a writer. I had wanted to be a writer. In fact, was a writer from an even earlier age than I picked up the running. But by that point, I'm 24 when I moved to San Francisco. I was like overweight, out of shape, and not even thinking about running, honestly. And I just wanted to get the first decent writing job or editing job I could get. And it happened to be that the job I got was with a startup endurance magazine called Multisport. It was founded by Bill Katowski, the same guy who founded Triathlete magazine, coincidentally in 1983, the same year my dad ran his first Boston Marathon. And so I don't know, it was a fun job, and I still had an interest in endurance sports, but it was just really being in that environment what sparked my comeback to endurance sports. Like just being in that milieu, I couldn't resist. So yeah,
being surrounded by like just the stories and the inspiration and that sort of like way of being, I imagine, is just makes it impossible to resist.
Yeah, it was very, very, I mean, it wouldn't have been seductive for everyone, but for me, given my history, it was a slippery slope.
Yeah. So, you said you were overweight and obviously hadn't really been running at that point. Being in your mid-20s is probably a pretty good time to be able to bounce back and get into a higher level of like fitness and health, I guess. But what was that process like for you? I mean, I imagine you're covering and writing about and seeing like top elite athletes. Was it easy to, ease back into it, or were you like comparing yourself to some of those top pros? Because I find with myself, I'm just starting at triathlete or triathlon like sport, and I'm like looking at Jan Frodeno and comparing my workouts to, these people. And I have to constantly remind myself like, no, I'm just starting here. Like, take it easy.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think in those terms at all. In fact, I initially, I wasn't even thinking in competitive terms at all. It was just, I just started doing it, just running a bit with no particular ambitions. But, I started to lose weight, and, I was young, and, the fitness came back. And it just, I enjoyed it. It was just like when I got to the point where I could just crank out 10 miles, I'm like, this is fun. Yeah. But even then it took really a few years before I started thinking about actually racing. I was just enjoying doing it.
Yeah. I feel like that was a little bit similar to my experience after the first ACL. And it was just like, okay, exercising is fun, then starting to lose weight and feel better. And then because I'm running more and feeling better, I'm more conscious of my nutrition, and just like almost accidentally falling into a good pattern of health and fitness, and definitely a lack of stress or comparing or, worrying about racing or worrying about other people. And it's now in this sort of second phase of coming back after the second injury. I feel so much more aware of all these other things that it's almost more of a stressful process. It's harder to sort of accidentally fall into those like healthy patterns in a way.
Yeah, no, you can't, that first phase, you can't have a second time. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So for yourself, as you kind of started to get more into running again, you're writing about it. the 80/20 triathlon book is something I've been reading pretty thoroughly lately. And I imagine through this combination of experience yourself and also the writing process, you're starting to see these different patterns, understand what people are doing and what's working. And it seems like a lot of your writing has sort of been connecting dots that maybe people haven't really seen before. So I wonder when you first started having that experience where the melding of these, like the exercise and the endurance with the writing and sort of figuring out these new ways of communicating that begun.
Initially, I was strictly a journalist. I didn't consider myself, I had a little bit of experience, but I didn't consider myself any kind of expert or authority. So, if I wanted to write an article about speed work or whatever, like I would find a coach and interview the coach and then quote the coach in the article. But yeah, over time, I started competing again and improving, getting more serious. And I had, if you want, the goal certainly was never to become a coach or an authority. But it was a pretty good way. Like, even if that had been my goal all along, it was a pretty good way to go about it. Like, I'm training and competing on one side, and then learning from the masters on another. I didn't sign up for some course to get a credential or anything. Like, I was talking to Paula Newby-Fraser, and it was all initially early on. It was all endurance disciplines, Olympic mountain bikers. And I remember her doing a story on Eddie Matzker, who was the world's best inline skater back in like the mid 90s. So yeah, just an amazing collection of experiences, and it just all went in the soup. And fast forward a few years, eventually I started feeling like, I actually have my own ideas about this at this point. And it was, I think, in 2001. So 6 years after I got that job with the magazine, that I actually started coaching.
How did you find that transition? Like, for myself, as I had a period of like burnout and then really diving into a lot of like emotional, spiritual well-being and these practices. And similar to what you're talking about, it led me to the place where I was like, actually, I think I could, start sharing some of this information. But there was an interesting sort of period of like, am I good enough to share this? Is this valid? Making that transition to a coach is an interesting, like, psychological experience, I find.
Yeah, for me, I say this to this day, perhaps it doesn't do me any good, but I'm not a natural born coach. And it's part of the reason I waited. And even in 2001, I did it for a while and then stopped and then picked it back up again later. Coaches for me are a lot like teachers. Especially in this country, teachers are so poorly paid and poorly treated and taken for granted. Like, you have to really want to be a teacher,
yeah.
To put up with all that in this country. And coaches are, they're cut from the same cloth where, I've gotten to know some of the very best in the world, and you almost can't imagine them doing anything else. And for me, I'm different. I have kind of more of like, I guess, like a writer's mindset. It's writing is very solitary. It's not really collaborative. You don't want anyone else messing with it. It's like, we're not going to write this together. Like, it's mine.
Yeah.
You can copy edit it. Yeah. And so I remember, for the longest time thinking like the only athlete whose performance I care about is me, whereas like the great coaches I knew would just lie awake at night, thinking about their athletes and like, how do I make this person better? How do I help this athlete overcome, whatever their big obstacle is? Mm-hmm. So, But I got to a point where, a lot of people wanted me to coach them. And I did like some informal coaching. Both my brothers run, and I would coach them. And as I started to get older and I was no longer, trying to do things athletically that I'd never done before, I just started to feel there was more of like a desire to shift into more of a mentoring role. And I think the maturity helped me realize that just as there's more than one way to be a good writer, there's more than one way to be a good coach. And I started to think in terms of, I don't have to be the best coach, I just have to be the best coach I can be. Like I'm going to have a certain style. I'm not going to be able to work with every athlete, but I can, exploit my strengths and work around my weaknesses, or, develop my weaknesses. And that has put me in good stead. So, when I first sort of really dived back into it seriously again, only in 2016-ish. So it's been, 4 or 5 years where I've just been doing like a full roster of one-on-one athletes, in addition to a lot of custom training plans. And I've grown a lot in that time because that has been my mindset. My thought was, I fully intend to be a much more competent coach 5 years from now than I am today.
Yeah, that's cool. It sounds like an interesting sort of how the sort of evolution of that with different sort of phases of coaching as you acquire more knowledge and write about it. I wonder as well, how early on did your coaching include nutrition? Because that's obviously a pretty foundational and big part of a lot of your writing and things too.
Yeah, I used to do, I sort of dipped my toes into, actual standalone nutrition coaching. But I gave it up because I found it frustrating. When you coach fitness, athletes are going to do what you tell them to do. Adherence is really excellent. With nutrition, I found that I couldn't, when I start working with a new athlete, I know I can help the person. I don't know exactly what the road is going to look like, but I have absolute confidence that I can help the person. With nutrition, it's not like that. People just are their own worst enemies, in so many ways with diet. I remember joking with one runner I coached, I was coaching him on the fitness side, but he wanted some help with the nutrition. I said, honestly, the way I'm sure I could help you is if you came and lived with me for 6 months. If I saw everything you put in your mouth, then this could work. But it made me realize that's pretty much the only way I could, with a few exceptions, the only way I could really guarantee the same level of success with nutrition would be I've got a couple spare bedrooms in my home. So I don't really, because I do have knowledge, and an interest, the coaches, the athletes I coach on training, if they have nutrition questions, I handle them. But I'm also, if someone wants a deeper level of help, I'll actually refer them to someone else.
Mm-hmm. So, with the nutrition side of it, I can only imagine it's more challenging because it's so much more wrapped up in our emotional kind of state of being, well-being, dogmatic beliefs, just, unconscious and conscious habits and things like that. With the sort of amount of coaching you've done and what you're just talking about and what you've seen, is that, core to some of those issues with changing nutrition?
Yeah, that's a big piece. And, also, the environment is really working against you, when you want to maintain healthy eating habits, the whole world doesn't want you to succeed in that effort. So that makes it hard as well. There's a variety of factors, and even our own bodies, I don't know, I've gotten to this point where I don't even really crave unhealthy food, but I remember I remember distinctly when I was in college and I was at my heaviest and most out of shape, and I didn't like it because it wasn't that in college. It wasn't that long ago that I'd been fit and lean. Mm-hmm. That was a fairly recent memory, and I would just look at my beer belly and love handles and think disgusting.
Yeah.
But then I also remember thinking I'm probably going to be this way for the rest of my life, because I wasn't interested in running, and I did not have the willpower to change how, I ate almost all my meals at, the student dining center, and they had some healthy food and some not healthy food. And I would eat the not healthy food every time. I might go in there saying, this time I'm going to choose the healthy food, and I just wouldn't. So I know how it is. I think I'm living proof that you can shift out of that. But for me, it did not happen overnight. It was a process. And I'm glad to be where I am now, where my wife is a great cook. She likes to cook healthy, prepare healthy food. And I don't miss the stuff that I used to not be able to leave alone.
Yeah, totally. So I'd love to come back to nutrition in a bit, but kind of digging a little bit more into, the training plans, the 80/20 triathlon book, and sort of a lot of the stuff you outlined there. For somebody signing up for a plan and it populates in Training Peaks or wherever it is, and, it can go from 6 up to 15, 20 hours a week. It can feel overwhelming, especially going from maybe one sport to 3 sports, and integrating this into life is its own challenge. But, what, in a general sense, how, like if you were to do 90% of the training plan versus 80%, obviously 100% is the goal. Is there, anywhere in there where you feel like you can still be successful without doing 100% of the plan?
Yes. I mean, a point I make fairly often is that if you look at some of the greatest endurance performances in history, like an Ironman course record, or, a world half marathon record or whatever, and you look at the training that preceded it, it was never perfect. Never. Something that no other human has ever surpassed came on the heels of imperfect preparation. Like, that's the name of the game. So if you're in the same boat as the best in history, that's a pretty good boat to be in. At the same time, I really think that people should be realistic in their planning. And I remember one guy who hired me to do a custom training plan for him. He said, I think he was a runner, and he's like, I want to do 6 runs per week, but realistically, I'm only going to do 4 or 5. And so if you can just tell me which ones I can skip. And I'm like, no, no, I'll give you a plan with 4 or 5 runs per week. Like a 6 runs per week plan where you habitually skip 1 or 2 is not a good plan. I would, if after 15 weeks, we look back and you did 4 or 5 per week, like that's a very different training process than I thought I was giving you. And so people need to be responsible and realistic in deciding, for the plans, my 80/20 endurance plans, like, there are different levels, 0 to 4, like 0 would be, kind of beginner. And 3, the highest level is like pretty darn advanced. Like, pick a realistic level. And we do offer, I sound like a salesman here, but like we do offer a level guarantee. So if you pick a level that's either too high or too low, for free, we'll swap you to a different level. And then, so that's my advice on that front. But to circle back to the beginning, like, inevitably it's not going to go perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think, another thing that's interesting, like for myself, I've signed up for a 70.3 near the end of the year. And I think like my sort of old self would have just gone full Ironman for my first, sign up ever, and sign up for level 2 or 3 of one of your courses. But really trying to like check the ego and be like, no, like I'm going to do the 70.3. I'm going to start with level 0. I've got a long runway. Do you find it's hard to have people, be realistic in those senses, and like, manage what is just realistic. And, I think that also ties into something like a 80-20, where so much of it is low intensity. Going zone 1, zone 2 can be really slow and really challenging. And it's getting people to slow down holistically is, yeah, how do you find that?
I would say there are probably, two basic types, like those who kind of just accept that it's endurance sports, right? It's a slow grind. And then others who, maybe they understand that intellectually, but they know where they want to get and they're in a hurry. And those athletes, they can be, it can be difficult to manage their expectations. But that's just the name of the game. For me, the ones who want to get ahead of themselves, I just try to keep reminding them progress is progress. And, if you're taking it one step at a time, you're consistently making progress, and that's good. It might not be fast. I mean, it's what the evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould would call a punctuated equilibrium, like where there are periods when it doesn't seem like you're making any progress, and then there are like little breakthrough periods too, where it at least feels like you got a lot fitter in a short period of time. But overall, it's just this. It's kind of like a very falls flat. But if you can embrace the mantra progress is progress, then it can be easier to accept that it's not necessarily rapid progress.
Yeah. Yeah, my like holistic life coach, in all aspects of life, be it like spiritual, emotional, physical, is always kind of preaching like 1% each day. And I really try and like hold that mantra close, because there's days where I don't feel super fresh, don't feel super good, and it's like, well, that 30-minute run is the 1% for today, and just remembering that, and it makes it a little bit easier to do rather than to just like throw it out the window.
Yeah, I mean, truly, it all hangs together. Everything contributes. Like epic workouts are not the only tool. Days off,
Yeah.
quality sleep. Those they contribute just as much. They're just not as sexy. It's very easy to associate progress with like the hardest work. And don't get me wrong, I love epic workouts, but they're one piece of a puzzle with many pieces.
Yeah, it feels like in recent years, like rest and sleep is getting so much more attention, and people are starting to see the value in that a lot more, but it's still sometimes challenging. Like you just said, like a rest day, feels like I'm not doing anything, but like you just said, you are in fact doing something. Like that is progress. That is contributing to the forward momentum. Do you find that that's something that's been a lot easier to coach with people recently, or is it still pretty challenging?
I feel like the recovery piece and stuff like that. People have been talking about that as far back as I go. Honestly, perhaps there is. I will say that I do see a little bit like broader currency in the idea that balance is necessary. But no, it's still fundamentally the same, where people get it, but they often like give lip service.
Yeah.
Like take something like sleep. Are people actually sleeping more than they were, like athletes, than they were 20 years ago? I don't think so.
Yeah.
They know they should, but when you look at like where people start cutting corners, it's not the epic workouts.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So on that front, like with the sort of emphasis on the low intensity training, especially with the endurance stuff, it just seems so important. And, I'm using heart rate as my sort of guiding foundation. But do you see a lot of people maybe miscalculating that and their low intensity still being too high a lot of the time?
Yes, and even more than that, I see athletes kind of becoming over dependent on their devices and data. I've just started working on a book about that. It's fundamentally about pacing, which is just the capacity to regulate your effort. And it applies to training. We think of pacing in terms of competition, but it applies in training as well. And so I've just been doing a lot of thinking on the topic and a lot of research, and it's not like jumping out at me, like all these examples of like just over dependence on devices. I'll give you an example. Just yesterday on our 80/20 endurance forums, there was an athlete who said he was struggling with, he was getting discouraged because he felt like he was using pace and heart rate to try and stay in the right zone. And he felt like, my heart rate is getting higher at the same pace. And, it just seems like it's not working. And I'm going backwards. And like his device was telling him, I think he had a Garmin that was telling him that his like VO2 max was going down. And so I asked him, because I've gotten used to this type of problem. I said, well, how are you actually feeling? If you weren't wearing the watch, would you know something was wrong? And he came back and said, no. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. The problem is your relationship with the device. The training's working, and I see that, like, sometimes it's even like a battery issue with a heart rate monitor. Like people are like about to call their cardiologist. It's like, coach, I'm dying. It's like, no, just need a new battery in that watch. Right. So that's something to be wary of. I mean, to get back to your original question, so that can be kind of a sub issue where, but it's really all about, like, all those little issues can be solved if you just remember who's boss. Like, like your device works for you. And yes, it takes some knowledge and some experience to get to that point. But still, like, just understanding that these things have a way of becoming crutches when they're meant to be tools. Just having that broad understanding can help you work through these issues more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like keeping that perspective of them being tools or training wheels, in a sense, where it's like, the ultimate goal is to be able to be aware and in tune with our bodies enough that we can feel our way through it. But I think so much of our sort of culture has desensitized us to ourselves in a way that it takes a little bit of training to get that feeling back, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting, like the sort of data relying and people just getting so obsessed with it, and it can be like a battery, like you said, that's not functioning right, or people maybe using the heart rate on the wristwatch, which maybe is less accurate. I wonder, like, from your perspective, like, what's the sort of ideal amount of that tracking that sort of works before it goes over the top? Because there's like sleep trackers and 24-hour things.
Right.
There's like the heart rate monitor, or the power meter, or the watch. And so, like, do you find that there's like a healthy balance rather than having 10 different tracking devices?
Yeah, it's funny. This is a well-timed conversation because of the research I've been doing. But there are a couple studies I was just writing about yesterday. One was it was a study on device dependency in runners, and the psychologists who did the study, their hypothesis would be that less experienced runners would tend to be more device dependent, more experienced runners less. And that was true. Like, individual psychological characteristics also played in, but definitely more experienced runners tended to be device dependent. And what they also found was that So there was it was a step-by-step process that you could see. Again, it wasn't every runner who went through the same process, but there was a clear trend where the more experienced runners became in using their devices, the more focused they became and selective in specific feature use. So they had a list of it was probably 10 different specific features. And there's a graph showing they had 4 different buckets of experience. It was 1 to 3 years, 4 to 7, whatever. And the most experienced runners, 11 plus years of experience, use every single feature of the 10 less, all of them, including time. That doesn't mean they didn't use it. I think 78% said yes, they monitor time, but it just goes to show you that you don't really need most. I don't want to disparage, any one of those features can be useful, but it's very interesting and instructive to see what it tends to look like. And then there was another study, a little bit different in nature, but kind of made the same point, where they had cyclists and triathletes do simulated indoor time trials under 2 circumstances. One, they were just given one bit of performance feedback or objective data. And I want to say it was elapsed time, I think it was. And then the same athletes in a separate occasion did the same time trial where they were given 6 different metrics. And they actually performed worse when they had more metrics. When they could just focus on one thing, which was just time, they performed better. Their attention was just put to better use. So again, any specific, if you just love to track your sleep and it works for you and you truly are the boss of that feature, that's fine. But yes, less is typically more. If you become a true master of pacing and just controlling the whole training process and race execution, you're probably going to be someone who is not scattered in their data usage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine, like you said about the sort of lip service before, it can also just be people oh, what's going on? This isn't working. And it's can create a lot of second guessing, and especially when you're too zoomed in and you don't have that more wider perspective. I think in my process, I'm using the times of the, training sessions, and then really just trying to look at the heart rate and follow that as the output or the exertion level, and really not look at pace per mile or kilometer or how far I've gone or things like that, and just try and trust as much as possible the process beyond those. But yeah, I can see oh, I'm not sleeping well, and then not doing anything about it, or I'm not getting faster and then not changing anything necessarily. You're just dwelling in this misinterpretation of the data possibly.
Yeah, and that's where it gets you can look at some of the psychological characteristics that feed into that, and that's a little thornier because your personality is your personality, right? But certain personality characteristics do lead people down that path, and really what it is people tend to become more scattered and dependent on the stuff when they don't feel in control. It's really a lack of self-trust. The more self-trusting you are, the more you tune things out. Someone says, look at this metric. Isn't this a beautiful, shiny metric that you might want to use? And you're no, not interested. I know what I'm doing. And so that's where you want to get to. So I honestly think, and this is one of the things I love about endurance sports, is that the process of becoming a better athlete is also a growth journey. You can become a more fully realized version of yourself simply in pursuit of getting faster, if you choose to embrace it that broadly.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best part of it probably, or the most exciting potential at least. I was going to ask too, when people come to you, I imagine most people are looking for for training, for like increase in performance at whatever level, potentially like guidance on nutrition. But how often do you see that sort of evolution and growth in terms of like a personality or like, yeah, a more evolved realization of themselves?
Yeah, that's tough. You know, I wrote a blog post within the last year. I think the title of it was "Are You a Chosen One?" and where I talk about how, and this is tough stuff. Like me, I'm just a truth teller. Like I really think that like if you see something and you know it's true, say it, you know, because it ultimately I don't think there's any other alternative way to get anywhere. And if you piss a few folks off, oh well. But the point I was making there is like not everyone is actually capable of change, or at least, you know, not much. Like, you know, I give an example of like, you know, people who go to church for, you know, every Sunday for 10 years, and like, you know, the whole congregation gets the same sermons every Sunday. And then some people really take it to heart, and after 10 years they've gone a long way. And then there are going to be other people sitting right next to them in the pews who haven't budged. You know, they've heard the same thing, but they may even think, you know, it just, you know, makes them feel good while they're in the building, and they may think they're getting somewhere, but it's not taking it. And dangerous analogy, but like it really is the same. And the type of, you know, for me, like that, I agree with you. Like that is the most exciting part of it, is that you can change as a person. But you know, it just doesn't always happen. You know, like, you know, a lot of athletes can be exposed to the same opportunity. It's really no different, to give another analogy, like going to college. Like not everyone takes advantage. Like it's this awesome opportunity, and some people just coast and party and whatever. So it's there for the taking. But I mean, you're the one that has to reach out and take it. And for me, it is, you know, there's nothing from a coaching perspective, there's nothing more exciting than seeing people take it. Like that's why, you know, I really like it when get to work with an athlete for years. And not to say like I'm more mature or advanced than the people I coach. Like, you know, like they could sit here in the seat I'm in and tell you what's wrong with me. but you know, I am the coach, and sometimes I get to see real development happen, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that's super exciting. And, you know, with my own sort of more of the holistic life coaching, you know, it feels like magic to see that sometimes. And, you know, I find a big part of the role that coaches play in that way, and that sort of side of the spectrum, is like helping people see the evolution that they're making, because it can be so easy to get bogged down when you're in it, you know, grinding potentially every day. And I think it's more natural for humans to sort of dwell on the challenges maybe than the wins a lot of the time. So how do you see that as a coach, that role of sort of, you know, being like, hey, you know, you did this, you're making this progress, and almost giving them like permission to see the wins?
Yeah, any athlete who works with me for a period of time, like, you know, I think every athlete enjoys pleasing their coach. That's part of it. And I think people, when they start working with me, they might have certain expectations for what will please me, like crushing a workout, and then they soon discover like that's not it. It really isn't. And yeah, so the ones who stick with me, like they see that those are the types of things that it's almost actually. And I wrote a blog post about this recently as well. Like it's almost like I view my role as a coach as like I'm trying to put myself out of a job. Like I'm trying to make myself unnecessary. And when I see that happening, like that's like when an athlete makes a great decision, or like just improvises under pressure or stress in like a smart way, like they get major pat on the back from me for that. And when like I had one athlete I coached who like he periodically he would say like, so were you impressed? Like if he did his fastest half-mile intervals, I'm like, no, like if you had run them faster than anyone ever in the history of the world, yeah, I would have been impressed. But that's not what does it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's been a funny theme, maybe in one of the podcasts I listened to with you, but some other people too, where it's like nobody cares about your PR. Like nobody
Right.
cares about
Yes.
that, right? But like when you are becoming a more evolved and tuned, connected human being in a more holistic sense, that's, impressive no matter, you know, it's like the unquantifiable stuff that can be more impressive.
Yeah. And in a sense, because it is harder. Mm-hmm. That's you can't be impressed by breathing, like that. I mean, you have to do something special.
Right.
and growth is hard. And when it's achieved, it is special.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the things that drew me to triathlon and more endurance stuff and getting back into that. And, so much of the last few years, personally, it's been, okay, how can I trust my heart more in my career, in my relationships, in my relationship with myself and my family? And it's such an unquantifiable thing that when I started reading more about like heart rate based training, I was like, oh, this is interesting because it's sort of a quantifiable way to sort of learn to trust your heart more and let that guide you, kind of get the ego out of there a little bit more, and just begin to listen to your body, listen to that sort of guiding compass in all of life more. And that was kind of something that made me feel like, okay, this has a deeper purpose, than just completing some race.
Yeah, great. Very, very well said. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. In my most recent book, The Comeback Quotient, I try to, because I feel like I've come so far in my own journey. And, I've gotten to a point now where like I'm so self-trusting and nothing scares me. Like, and it's just such a beautiful feeling. Like, things go wrong, and I don't want them to, but I don't waste any time or energy wondering if things might go wrong or hoping they don't go wrong, because I know I'm going to be fine. Right. It just doesn't really matter. Like I control what I can control. And if things really go sideways, I know I'm going to be fine. And sometimes I even like it, it takes about this long for me to go from, oh crap, to let's see what's possible here. Like, like when I got COVID very early on, like early March last year, sick for a month, lost more fitness in less time than I have since I first quit running at the end of high school. And, there was like this, this briefest moment where I'm like, oh God, this sucks. Cause I was like super fit, like when it hit, but like in no time, I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Like, when I start over, I'm going to be so unfit. Like I want to see like, given like all my knowledge, all my experience and all my self-trust, I want to see how fast I can get it back. Like not bullheaded, not being an idiot and forcing it, but most like being like persistent and tough. Yeah. But being smart above all. I'm like, this is going to be like a cool experiment. And no matter how well it goes, I'm going to learn a ton. Like I haven't had an opportunity like this because I'm not going to voluntarily miss a month of training. It's like, my point is like anyone can get there, because I sure as heck did not start anywhere close to that, being capable of that mindset. And when you do get to that point, and not to suggest that the journey is ever complete, but when you get there, it's just, there's no better feeling just to have that kind of confidence that it's like, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sort of sense of inner peace and freedom in a sense is kind of like the ultimate goal, and creating that, that sense of safety. I think so many of us, it's like, for some period of time, we're trying to find that externally, be it like the number in the bank account or have the house or, run it, whatever it is, like have whatever gear. And then, there's a process of like, oh no, I need to create this deeper sense of safety and confidence from within myself. And that is what allows like what you're talking about. And it reminds me of, I just finished re-listening to the book, The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. I don't know if you've ever listened to that, but his whole sort of life is like this whole unfolding of this thing where all these challenges come up and he's like, well, my preference would have been for something else to happen, but the universe is bringing this challenge, and it's that opportunity for something new to come from it. And it's so powerful.
Just wrote that one down. Sorry.
Oh,
that sounds really good.
Yeah. But yeah, it's so it's interesting with your experience with COVID, and I think that you mentioned as well that you've been dealing with some longer term issues coming out of that. I was wondering if you could share some of that too.
I mentioned that I was sick for a month, and then my comeback went great, and it was just an absolute blast. And I was healthy for 6 months, and then I started to unravel. I thought I might have like iron deficiency or something initially, but it's become apparent that I'm a long hauler. I don't think it's super usual for like that kind of 6 month gap between the active viral infection and the long haul thing. And so that started in early October. So I'm coming up on 7 months in, I think. And interestingly, also, I never had a positive COVID test or even an antibody test. By the time I got the antibody test, which was negative, it was worthless. I mean, I know because I've had some of like just the bizarre like phantom smells type of stuff, and yeah, just up and down the line, it's COVID. But my doctors don't. They need a test. So, they've just been looking at like, I've listed all the symptoms I've had of the long haul part of it. And it's 21, some they come and go, wax and wane, but so it's a lot of symptoms. And the doctors just like, they take one symptom at a time and send me to a specialist to look at like one piece of the puzzle, which is just stupid. But in the process of this, I was discovered that I have a heart condition that is not COVID related. Oh. So yeah, when that happened, most exercise helps most things. Like you could have cancer and exercise would, by and large, be a good thing to keep in the mix. But with chronic fatigue syndrome, which is kind of like a version. Chronic fatigue syndrome tends to occur post-virally, even before COVID. So, they say exercise, they call it post-exertional malaise. And my instinct for the longest time was to keep doing what running I could. Everything was short, everything was slow, everything was by feel. But I felt like on balance, even if it doesn't feel good, it's got to be good. But, I started researching that, and it's like, probably not this post-exertional malaise. You could actually be like prolonging the whole thing. And then I got the heart diagnosis, and I'm like, you know what? I just need to pull the plug on running. But same deal. I mean, I think people who are familiar with my career know that like running is a huge part of my life. Yeah. And I stopped, I don't remember the last time I ran now, and I'm totally okay with it. Yeah. I really am. I just like, I feel like this is okay too. Like there are moments when I miss it intensely, but that's fine, and for me, it's just like, this is the next, I'm still the same person. I still have like the same drives and passions and stuff. And now I'm just like finding different ways to express them and manifest them, and like making lemons out of lemonade. Like, my wife is like for decades has had to like, fit around my obsession with endurance training. And now like we're on exactly the same exercise program, like right. 2 mile walk in the morning, 2 mile walk in the afternoon together. And it's great. It's pretty cool. So I may never run again. I might, I probably won't compete again. But yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. And if that would have happened like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I imagine it would maybe be a little bit of a different process internally.
Yeah. To be quite honest, like it's not it's all not all a function of like of me being where I am, like spiritually or whatever. It's also like I I don't have any unfinished business as an athlete, and that definitely helps, because until just a few years ago, I very much did, and so yeah, it would have stung a lot more, even just say 5 years ago.
Yeah. So were there a couple of like significant boxes that you ticked in the last few years then, like in terms of races or times or goals that you accomplished?
I mean, yeah, my great white whale forever was a sub 240 marathon. Like, I knew just from the times I ran in high school that I should be able to do that, and but it just didn't happen. And part of it was like, I lost a lot of time to injury after injury after injury, and just other stuff. It just never came together. And I actually let go of it, because I was 40 and then 42 and then 44. And at some point I'm like, well, like I know enough exercise science to know, like, it ain't happening. I mean, not that people that age don't PR, but they don't, when they started running at 11 and ran their first marathon at 28 and set their existing PR at 37, and now they're 46 and they haven't come within 8 minutes of that PR despite many attempts. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't happen. But then I spent the summer of 2017 for a writing project, living and training and racing with a professional running team based in Flagstaff. And I'm spoiling the end of my book about it, Running the Dream, but I did it at 46. I ran a 2:39 marathon. And of course, it was like way more awesome an achievement for having been so long deferred. I mean, I literally like made peace with it never happening and moved on, and then it happened. So there was that. And then I had done one Ironman when I was 31. And it went okay. You make a lot of mistakes in your debut. And then after that, kind of similar deal, I actually signed up for, I think, 4 other Ironmans, none of which I started because of injury. And then so at 48, I finally did my second Ironman. And, I just wanted to just have a race that would just feel like I had closure on it. And, I definitely wanted to beat my 31-year-old self, and I did. So yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I think, like yourself, and there's some other athletes out there that are doing pretty amazing things as they're aging. And it's probably a combination of, the sort of spiritual development alongside like just a smarter understanding of themselves and the training and the nutrition and all that stuff. And so it's inspiring to see, because I think, like, I'm 35 now, and to think like, wow, I can get better for the next 10, 15 years. Like, that's pretty cool, because it's not the norm, I guess, as like a human athlete.
Yeah, the game is changing, and that's part of what made this. Until I had to pull the plug, it became more and more of a motivator for me. Like, I wanted to be kind of, like a pioneer of like redefining the limits. I ran a 10K PR, but during that 6-month window, like post COVID and pre long haul.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, they've got the super shoes now, which certainly help. But I mean, I don't care what kind of shoes I was wearing. Like, I was way fitter and faster at 49 than I ever thought I would be. And yeah, it was cool. I just felt young. I mean, I still do, even though I'm not running. So yeah, a huge part of it is just like understanding that like fitness sits on a foundation of health. Mm-hmm. And, if you look back at like, the top marathoner, top runners of the 70s, the first running boom, they were, they didn't do all that other stuff. They just ran hard and ran a lot. Yeah. But it shows you what you can get if you just, just don't give more than lip service to the total health picture.
Yeah, totally. So for myself, I've got a couple more like sort of personally related questions. So in 2015, I ran my first and only marathon. and I ran it in 2:58. And that year I ran a 1:20 half marathon, and my 10K PR was just over 37 minutes. And, it's not anything insane, but for me, I was feeling quite good and pretty light, and, it's decent time. And then post this second ACL injury, so much of the last couple of years has been relearning like motor recruitment and, core strength. And yeah, my body changed quite a bit with more strength training and sort of mobility and lifting heavier weights and things I'd never done before. And so now it's been like 3 months or so, 4 months maybe, of a lot of low intensity stuff, and now getting into a proper training plan. So a relatively short period of time, but I wonder like what you see as people get into proper endurance training and building up their aerobic system. Like I imagine there's going to be sort of a slow evolution of like change in body composition. I wonder if there's any sort of general trends or timelines that you see in that process.
My temptation is to tell you to not even think that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that is kind of my answer. It's like, coach, what's the future?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, it's just, it really is like if I were your coach, I would say it's like, okay, what should we be doing in the process that we're not doing?
Yeah.
If we're doing everything right, then it's going to happen at the pace it should happen. Like that we can control. Mm-hmm. I seem to have lost track of my crystal ball. So I don't know how fast. I mean, quite honestly, and, maybe another coach, if you asked that question, they would just pretend they knew the answer.
Yeah.
They'd be like, oh, in a case like yours, you can, 6 months, you'll be feeling right as rain. And they would be lying to you. They would, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
but I mean, you're young, you're motivated. It sounds like you understand what the process should look like. So you're going to get there. But I don't know. I just don't.
Yeah, it's funny. And I think that's a good answer. And I, as somebody who's trying to learn to coach themselves as well, it's like, that's what I keep telling myself, don't think about that. Don't worry about that. Just do, the workouts today, make the good choices with sleep and nutrition today, and just try and stay present with each choice each day and that process, and enjoy that as much as possible. Like I try to bring myself back to that, but it's funny, the older I've got, the less patient I had become, the more it's like, how can I expedite this process, and really trying to change that thought pattern is maybe the hardest part of this process so far, I think.
Yeah. Well, one thing you might do that, could be helpful is to, set up little intermediate goals, or, what's really helpful when, it's going to take a while to get where you really want to go, but there can still be moments along the way where you get a taste of it. It's just like I'm not back, but I'm getting there. Mm-hmm. And if you can think in terms of like, what kinds of experiences might I have, a few weeks from now and a few weeks after that, that would just give me everyone needs that.
A little motivation, right?
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what form those might take, but just little opportunities to prove to yourself that it's working and you're getting somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. So I did want to talk a little bit more about the nutrition stuff specifically. I mean, you've written quite a bit about it in terms of the endurance diet, and also about sort of different fads and diets that people have attached to, especially in the sort of niche of the health world that I sort of look at and exist in, I guess, like the paleo, keto, high fat, bulletproof coffee stuff is like really prevalent. And I have fallen into some of those categories, at different times. And I'm at a point now where I almost feel confused. You know, there's just so much out there, and so many, everyone claims all the science backs up their version of it. And, you know, listening to you speak on other podcasts and talking about the sort of the endurance diet and what professional or elite athletes are doing is just eating really healthy whole foods for the most part. You know, like I'm curious to know a little bit more about your sort of insight into that, and yeah, what you can share in terms of any sort of like overarching themes or guidelines.
Yeah, and, you know, as an athlete myself, former athlete, whatever, whatever I am, my instinct was always to look at what the best are doing, and like not one top professional because they could be weird, but just like in general, like I want to train the way they're training, I want to think the way they're thinking, and I want to eat the way they're eating. And science is just so easy to abuse. And even when it's done well, you know, I'm not a scientist, but I've become, you know, I look at a lot of science, and one thing I've learned about it is like even a really well done experiment that like seems to have some like practical relevance can be totally impossible to really apply to the real world. And it's just like, it's so neat and tidy that it's just not even real. And so I've just been on this path where I pay attention to the science and I go by best practices. And, you know, same with diet. You know, one thing I find myself saying often on this topic and other ones is that like you can't, as an athlete, you can't necessarily be an expert on these things, but you need to be able to, you need to have good taste in experts. You need to be able to know, like if you have like 10 people 10 experts telling you 10 different contradictory things that you should do with training or diet or whatever, you need to have the judgment or, you know, just overall wherewithal to know whom to tune out and who to listen to. And for me, like, you know, I get it that I was already well down the road when a lot of these fads came along, but still, like when I watch, you know, like a keto guru make their keto pitch, I'm like, you're a carnival barker. You know, it's like I don't, even if I knew absolutely nothing about nutrition, just judging on the basis of your performance, I'm not going to do anything you say. Yeah. You know, whereas people who are just like advocating the stuff that I think really works, it's not just that the substance is different. It's not just that they're advocating a different method. Their presentation is very different too. Like they sound rational, you know, like it's not like fear-based. It's not hyperbolic, you know, they're not trying too hard. You know, it's like, and I look around like, can't everyone see this? like this person's a charlatan and this person can be trusted. But I find myself tearing my hair out because, you know, I don't know, like, you know, people find this stuff very seductive. And I have friends who, you know, swear by intermittent fasting or whatever, but I just feel like, you know, it's all, you know, when people say, oh, it's confusing and, you know, it's like, it's hard. I'm like, no, it's simple and easy. It's right there in front of you. Just choose it. Yeah. So, you know, in the endurance diet, like I make my best pitch. Like, you know, just like I've got 250 pages where I'm just trying to get through to people. And if that doesn't work, I'm out of ideas.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like, you know, looking at some of these different people and figures that are selling these things, there is that very like the tone and the salesiness of it, or the fear-based pitches. But then even beyond that, in terms of the presentation, it's a lot of the times I'm like, wait, why am I starting to listen to this person? They don't look very healthy, you know? And I feel like even that is a sort of like filter that is maybe not even considered a lot of the time, is a very easy one to apply from the start.
Yeah. You know, one of the dirty little secrets, I remember talking with someone who was like, just totally like, he was actually an expert I trust. He has like a PhD in nutrition, but he's sort of in that realm, like neck deep in that realm. And he was saying like, Matt, like you wouldn't believe it. Like a lot of these people who promote this diet or that diet, like they don't even eat that way. Like when they're behind closed doors, they don't even do it.
Yeah. That's kind of scary to think, but it's just all the more reason for people to learn to trust themselves more, right?
Yeah. I mean, this has been a little bit of a theme, but like to a certain extent, it's on you. Like if you have like that magic bullet mentality where you want someone to just wave a wand and make it all better, well, you get what you deserve.
Yeah, you're going to be buying a lot of magic bullets.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I've been reading more and more from people that I do seem to trust is that a lot of endurance athletes generally are maybe not getting enough protein. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
I don't know. Well, I guess I would say yes, but it's kind of I would say when that's a problem, it's a problem that you create. So like until fairly recently, like veganism or like plant-based, as they're calling it now, wasn't really much. It didn't really have much of a penetration in the endurance sports realm, but that's changing pretty quickly. And so, I know of cases with athletes who just eliminate animal foods from their diet, and then they have problems. And sometimes it's iron deficiency. Other times it's, the consequences of not having enough protein or amino acids in their diet. Some people are just not eating enough. That whole REDS phenomenon, which is prevalent too. So I don't know, like, I think it's a problem that is extremely unlikely to appear if you just eat like the pros, as I recommend. And, I remember like, I often cite the East African runners as, example, when people like think that they need supplements in order to be successful endurance athletes. I'm like, I've been to Kenya. There are no supplements. There are also no better runners. And analyses of, the diets of elite Kenyan and Ethiopian runners. I mean, they're quasi-vegetarian, like, cause meat is expensive and hard to get for a lot of people in those countries until like they've, won the Berlin Marathon or something. And so like they're barely meeting World Health Organization standards for protein intake, and they're basically fine. I mean, not to say that it wouldn't be nice if they could, have access to all the food they might want. But I mean, it can happen. It does happen. But I think most often when it does, it was a problem that was created like by diet choices that are like extremely easy to reverse.
Right. And I guess like in our sort of Western culture, unfortunately, a lot of the times that people are inspired to starting to eat healthy is to sort of overcome deficiencies or a lack of balance or just some sort of state of not being healthy, I guess. And it feels like more unusual that somebody has just ate healthy their entire life. So in that sense, like, do you see a time and a place for supplementation? Or is it really something that should be able to be avoided with a healthy diet, healthy moving? I mean, it's interesting when you spoke about like the science and these experiments are just so hyper isolated that it's like nothing really functions in that way. I'm aware of like supplements too. Like you take one mineral or vitamin and it was never meant to be delivered to the human body in isolation. Mm-hmm. It's wrapped up in all the other things that come with that plant or a piece of meat.
Yeah, my philosophy on supplements is like, it's not like they're great, the more the merrier, or they're evil, avoid them at all costs. It's like individual supplements can be helpful or even actually necessary in certain circumstances. Like I actually did have my own little flirtation with iron deficiency at one point. It was actually right before I went to Flagstaff to train with the pros. It was discovered. Started taking iron supplements, like felt a lot better. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. It's just you need to just. I mean, what I would avoid is like, again, that magic bullet approach is like, you know, when people think like sports nutrition, what is sports nutrition? What's the first thing they think of? It's like sports drinks, you know, supplements. I'm like, wrong. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so if you just avoid getting the cart before the horse and like take care of like the heavy lifts, and then if you've basically taken care of all that and you need some marginal gains, then you might perhaps need to, you know, there's like seasonal, you know, vitamin D deficiency and such that you know might need to be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. So the last kind of topic I wanted to touch on was, you know, your career as a writer and sort of parallel to endurance sport and all this. And, you know, you've written a lot of books looking through your website. It's pretty prolific. You know, most people, you know, the idea of writing one book is a crazy sort of endeavor to embark on. So I'm kind of curious to know like what that process has been like, and, you know, how integrated with your movement practices and this, you know, pursuit of endurance it's been. Like, traditionally have ideas and these dots connected to you on long runs, you know, when you're sort of just out in the zone, and, you know, is there sort of a back and forth that these different practices and pursuits help one another?
Well, you know, I grew up, you know, by the time I was a sentient being capable of like retaining memories and stuff, like there were books on bookshelves in my family's home with my dad's name on the spine.
Okay.
And, you know, when I was 9 years old and I decided I wanted to grow up to be a writer, there was like a romance to that to me. Like I wanted to get my first book published from about age 10. And so, you know, and I tried like the Dickens pretty much all the way. I think I was 30 when I got my first real book contract, and I'm like, here we go. It's not going to be the last, I can tell you that. And for me, kind of what, you know, it's not really, you know, I don't write books really to make money. Like I make more money doing other things, and probably would make more if I stopped writing and put all of my time into those other things. So it's not really that. And it's not really, I don't know, for its own sake. It's because I have things to say. You know, that's why, like, I won't write another book if I don't, like, it is a lot of work, like you said, and there's really no guarantee that they're going to succeed. I've had flops. So it's a pretty big commitment. And for me, like, I'm not going to make that commitment unless I have this like sense of urgency around like the message I'm trying to convey, or just the thing I want to create. So the way I explained it to people is like, the feeling is like, I can't possibly, like, please Lord, don't let me die before I finish this book. Like if I can get to that place, then that's a book I need to write, I need to finish. And I'm just, you know, all the time, just the way my brain is wired. Like, I'm not really good at, like retaining knowledge. Like, there's certain things my brain isn't really good at it, but my brain is very good at finding the gaps. Like, sometimes I'll just be watching the news or whatever, and like a conversation will take place between an interviewer and an expert. I'm like, they're missing this thing that should be touched on. They're not saying it. Like, and that's the way my brain operates in the endurance context all the time. It's like, you know, there's this gap here that like somebody ought to fill. And then I'm like, well, why not me? And that's usually how it comes about. So I'm just like, I'm driven by my curiosity and my kind of natural knack for, finding something that I feel needs to be said that no one has said yet. Like my worst nightmare. Well, I'm just I would never, I don't understand who people like who do kind of like pile on type of messaging or Me Too type of messaging, not the political Me Too, the other one, where it's just like, yeah, what he said. Like I'm never going to write anything that is just kind of reinforcing something that someone else has already said. It's almost like, even though I'm writing like books intended to really help athletes, I almost treat it like a novel. It's like, you're not going to write a novel that someone else has already written, just like, just another cookie cutter detective story or whatever. So, I could completely run out of ideas, but I don't know, because my dad is, he's 77 and he's still, I'm very much like, we're very different types of writer, but like he's an idea factory. Like he still writes several hours a day. So I think I'm probably headed in the same direction.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, you just seem to have such a curious, enthusiastic sort of perspective and outlook on life. And I can only imagine, like, as you embrace that more and more, it just continues and doesn't diminish.
Yeah. I'm tempted to say I hope so, but at one time I hoped I would never have to stop running. So yeah. It'll be okay if I do run out of ideas.
Yeah. And have you ever written anything like more fictional or been drawn to doing that?
My dad's a fiction writer primarily, and no, I could not write fiction, or I could if you made me, but it would not be good. But I do like narrative writing, and so very slowly over the course of my career, if you took all of my books and lined them up and just kind of charted the evolution, like there's a point at which you could see me transitioning more into narrative writing. So, but I need to have true stories to tell. I mean, I wrote Iron War, which about the great rivalry between Dave Scott and Mark Allen in the 1980s, culminating in the race that is forever known as Iron War. And that book, funny enough, it just went out of print. And so my agent just found a new publisher to bring it back. So that book came out in 2011. And so I haven't looked at it in a long time, but it's like, it's been thrust back in front of me because of this. And like, that was sort of the book where I went all in. I mean, that book is almost pure storytelling. And I mean, it's a fantastic story, but I didn't create it. Like, the story was just there. And I just needed to do an absolute ton of research, to bring it fully to life. And, I loved it. It's probably even not, I like exegesis more than I like persuading people. Like, if I could only do one thing, I think that's probably what I'm best at. But I really love the narrative writing. Have done it quite a bit of it. But if I don't have a true story to tell, I can't like make up characters or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So your latest book, The Comeback Quotient, is really about sort of mental resilience and the sort of mindset. What was the sort of inspiration or spark that made you feel like you had to dive into that and share that? And what were some of the key sort of themes that you really like found as you did that?
Yeah, I view The Comeback Quotient kind of as a sort of sequel to How Bad You Want It. And How Bad You Want It, that's about mental fitness as well, but it really sort of introduces this biopsychological model of endurance, the idea that in endurance sports, we are limited by perceptions. Mm-hmm. And when people hear that, they think I'm saying that we're limited by figments of our imagination. I'm like, no, perceptions are every bit as real as, a mallet to your head. But like, that's the nature of our limits, and most people don't know that. And it's a total paradigm change. And so in that book, I really explore what are the implications of that. And there's a lot of narrative in that as well. It's partly because, I write the sort of books that I don't read many sports books, because I mean, most of what I read is fiction. I was an English major in college. So I use narrative because I just think I like stories. I know other people like stories. And I think stories can be a great way to communicate a message. So in that book, I had a lot of fun writing it. It's been successful and well received, but if there's a knock on it, which I did hear from sort of early Amazon reviewers, it's like, it doesn't sort of give you the steps. It's not a book that does like a lot of hand holding. It gives you like a perspective and a lot of inspiration. A lot of people who read it are fired up and they're like, now what do I do? Yeah. And so the Comeback Quotient is kind of like, now what do you do? And it just grew out of mostly my coaching work, where like I focus a lot on developing mental fitness in the athletes I coach. And some ways I just feel it's so helpful not to be a scientist, not to be knowledgeable, and just have to learn from in the trenches. And the thing I just, similar to like with training, like I just started through experience to develop my own ideas about things. And what I began to see was that mental fitness for me was all about facing reality. Like when I saw an athlete like fail to cope skillfully with adversity, it's because they've either failed to accept the reality, or having accepted it, they failed to embrace that reality, which just means committing to making the best despite, or having accepted and embraced it, they failed to address the reality. They just weren't willing to do what it took. To actually turn lemons into lemonade. They get to the point where like, it would be nice to turn this into lemonades, right? But it's too hard. That, to me, that's it in a nutshell. That's what I try to do for myself. That's the point where I try to get my athletes. So I just like it because it's super pragmatic. Like, I'm not the kind of person who wants to carve out 20 minutes a day for mental training exercises. I'm like, you know what? I would rather read or take a nap or something. But to me, it's like, there's no need for that, because the way I do it with my athletes is like, you can count on problems coming up, and those problems need to be solved, and solving the problems in sort of an intentional, systematic way can be your mental training. Like, you don't need extra time for it. Like, those problems are going to happen. Yeah. So that's how I do it. And that's sort of what I try to teach in that book. It's just an approach to problem solving that functions as mental fitness development.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, life is the mental fitness tool. Every day there's going to be some level of problems, big or small, to overcome. And I think, there's obviously a necessary level of awareness to bring that attention and intention to. So, developing that, obviously having a coach can be very helpful, but when somebody's doing it on their own, do you find tools like meditation or journaling helpful in terms of developing the awareness to be able to bring the intention daily to that exercise?
Yeah. I mean, it's both of those tools come up in the book. They're not like core parts of the system. But they can be very helpful, because it's a little bit, what I tell people is, like, anytime you experience a negative emotion, it's the emotional equivalent of pain. Like, it's the organism signaling a problem. Like, how do you know there's a problem? Because you're experiencing a negative emotion. Mm-hmm. And in order to have any chance of solving the problem that's being signaled by that emotion in the most effective way possible, you have to have meta awareness of it. Like, you can't just be inside the emotion, because if you are, the emotion's going to tell you what happens. Yeah. But if you're able to achieve kind of a metacognitive distance from the emotion, then you see possibilities. It's like, well, this is how I feel. It's real. I can't wish it away. But like, what's the problem that's being signaled by it, and what can I do about it? Sometimes all you can do about it is just a perspective shift. Other times you can actually just do something practical and physical to address the problem. But there's a bit of a catch-22, right? Like you need awareness to have awareness. And if you're not in the habit of that, like how do you get there? And that's where things like meditation and journaling, they can become things that sort of train you to do that reflexively. For me, I've just done it on the fly. I've just done it through, and in point of fact, that's how it happens with meditation. My older brother is a Zen Buddhist, and I've done some meditation at the Zen center he used to live in, and just under his influence, I've tested it out. And what I've found is, like, in the Zen thing, all you're trying to do is empty your mind completely, which is impossible. But I mean, it's a great tool for achieving that sort of metacognitive perspective, because you have to catch yourself thinking when you're supposed to not be thinking. And that's exactly what you're training there. But do you absolutely need mindfulness meditation to do that? No, because you can do exactly the same thing in the context of training or whatever. It's like your goal is to not let negative emotions just happen. Like the idea is to realize they're happening. And if that's your overarching intention that you just carry with you, at first you're going to suck at it. And it's only going to be after the fact that you're like, oh, shoot, I let that emotion totally rule me for an entire day. But like, if the intention is real, you'll get better and better and better at it. And you just shrink that gap down until it's like almost, well, it is basically reflexive, second nature, to be like, oh, wait a minute, negative emotion.
Yeah, totally. I think that's definitely vital to any sort of form of well-being. But I think it's interesting how you like formulate that sort of relationship with reality, and how much you accept it and take action towards embracing it and making the lemonade. But I think everyone's sort of reality is subjective to some degree, and I imagine, like, as a coach, being able to provide more of an objective perspective is super vital, because I can sit here and know, like, okay, yes, when things are, when I get lemons, let's make some lemonade, and this is the process. But I think it's still an orange, And,
right.
Like, how often do you find you got to sort of remind the people you're working with that, like, no, this is, just like nudging them maybe a little bit closer to what the reality is more objectively.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ruthless in that regard. Like, and like every coach has their own style, and I'm like a ruthless hard ass. Like, but I mean that is, but I think that's fine. It's just sort of like having a crass sense of humor at a dinner party. Like, whoever's left in the room after 15 minutes can be your friend. But for me, like, very early on when I started working at an athlete, they will see that I call BS on them. I simply, even if it's tiny, in fact, I prefer that it start with very small stuff, because it's less threatening to people. Like, I will not let them get away with it, like with maintaining illusions. And then, but I also try to model that, like I allow them to call BS on me, or I'll do it to myself. So that takes the threat level down. Where I see, like, that I show them same rules apply to this guy, and that can be very helpful. But it's constant. There's in the Comeback Quotient, every book has an epigraph, and one of them is it's from, I think, a psychologist named Robert Travers, and it's the human capacity for self-deception knows no limits. And it's true. And I see that in myself, here I am in the interviewee's chair, and I get to talk like I know everything, but like, I BS myself a lot too, my wife calls me out probably daily, when I try to maintain illusions.
Totally. Yeah. We need those mirrors for sure. And then
yes.
we need to have the awareness to not get trapped in those emotions when they get shown to us.
Yeah. And, the hardest part for me, because I am sort of naturally kind of defensive, and for me, what took a really long time is to actually like welcome that kind of BS calling. And, but then when you get to that point, it's super liberating because just nothing's threatening. It's just like, well, if it's true, I want to know.
Yeah, it goes from being something that you like take personally to being an opportunity to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately, if you ask someone point blank, are you perfect? They're going to say no, but then in practice, they act like they are. If you point something out, they get all offended. I'm like, well, I thought you weren't perfect.
Well, I think that's maybe a good spot to leave it. And, again, I appreciate your time and all the wisdom and research and, storytelling and everything. Excited to dig more into the body of work you've put out and share this as well. So thank you so much for all your work and everything you've been sharing.
You're welcome. I do a lot of podcasts, but I had a lot of fun with this one. So, you did a good job. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun for me too. So thank you.